In the summer of 1947, Pine Hollow, Alabama, came face to face with a truth they could not comprehend. 11 of their most powerful white supremacist leaders were found hanging from the very ironwood tree they had once used to destroy Ezekiel Turner's family. Only hours earlier, those same men had gathered confidently inside an abandoned sawmill, trading plans about how they would finish what they started with the Turner name. They expected no resistance, no witness, and no consequence. Yet by dawn, their bodies hung in identical positions, ropes knotted in a way none of them ever taught each other, and Ezekiel Turner, an unarmed veteran who returned home alone, was seen walking away from that tree without a single scratch. How did a single man turn the symbol of their dominance into the scene that destroyed their entire network? What happened inside those missing hours? Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The Greyhound bus lurched to a stop, its brakes hissing like a dying animal. Ezekiel Turner, known as Zeke to everyone who knew him, stood and retrieved his duffel bag from the overhead rack. His army uniform, pressed sharp despite the long journey, bore the weight of 4 years overseas. The fabric showed creases at the elbows where he'd rested his arms during the 2-day ride from the discharge center in Virginia. Ribbons decorated his chest, the Distinguished Service Cross, the Bronze Star, and the Purple Heart. Each one told a story he'd never share with the folks back home. He stepped down onto the dirt road. Dust rose around his polished boots. Pine Hollow, Alabama, 1947. The town looked smaller than he remembered. The bus pulled away behind him, leaving him alone on the empty road. Morning sun painted everything gold, but the light felt thin and weak. Nothing like the fierce brightness of the Pacific Islands where he'd spent years moving through jungles, silent as smoke. Zeke adjusted the duffel on his shoulder and started walking. The road stretched ahead, as familiar as his own hands. He'd run these paths as a boy, racing his late brother to the swimming hole every summer. Now he was bringing home stories for Samuel. His son would be 9 now, old enough to understand some things, yet young enough to still look at his father like he hung the moon. Sarah would be waiting on the porch. He could see her in his mind, flour on her hands from making biscuits, and that smile that made his chest tighten even after 12 years of marriage. Mama Ruth would be in her chair, Bible in her lap, humming those old spirituals she loved. He passed the Johnson farm. The cotton fields stretched to the horizon, plants swaying in the morning breeze. Nobody worked the rows yet. It was too early. But old man Johnson usually sat on his porch about now, smoking his pipe. Today the porch was empty. Zeke kept walking. His boots made soft sounds on the packed earth. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, then went quiet. Too quiet. Something felt wrong in the air, thick and heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. The Hendersons' clapboard house came next. Mrs. Henderson would normally be hanging laundry by now. Zeke could remember her waving to him when he left, telling him to come home safe. But as he approached, he saw curtains twitch. There was movement behind the glass, then nothing. The door stayed shut. Zeke's pace slowed. His instincts, honed sharp in combat zones where silence meant danger, started screaming. Something was deeply wrong. He passed the abandoned general store, its windows boarded up since before the war. The painted sign had faded to ghosts of letters. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt right. More houses, more closed doors, more faces turning away behind windows. By late morning he reached the turnoff to his property. The fence that marked the boundary leaned at wrong angles, posts broken like someone had driven through without caring. Zeke stopped, his hand tightening on the duffel strap. The smell hit him first, burned wood, ash, the acrid stink of destruction. His cabin, the home he'd built with his own hands before Samuel was born, stood half-collapsed. The roof had caved in on one side. Black scorch marks climbed the walls. The windows were empty holes, glass shattered and scattered in the weeds. The front porch where Sarah should be waiting was a pile of charred timber. "Sarah!" he called, his voice coming out rough. "Samuel! Mama Ruth!" Nothing. No movement. No sound except the wind through the ruined boards. Zeke dropped his duffel and moved forward. Glass crunched under his boots. He called again, louder, "Sarah! Samuel!" Only silence answered. A door creaked somewhere to his left. Zeke turned, his body automatically shifting into a combat stance. An elderly woman emerged from the neighboring house. It was Mrs. Ellery, who'd lived there since before Zeke was born. She moved like someone expecting to be struck. Her hands shook and her face was pale, her eyes rimmed red from crying. "Mrs. Ellery," Zeke said quietly, "where is my family?" She wouldn't look at him. She stared at the ground, wringing her hands. "Mr. Turner, I tried to stop them. I swear I tried." "Where are they?" "They came 2 nights ago," her voice broke. "A group of them. White robes, torches. They said your family was getting too uppity. Teaching Samuel to read from books that weren't approved. Sarah talking back to Mrs. Crawford at the market." Zeke's blood turned cold. "Where are they?" Mrs. Ellery pointed with a trembling hand toward the back of his property, toward the old ironwood tree that had stood there for 100 years, the tree where he'd built Samuel a swing, where Sarah liked to sit in the shade on hot afternoons. "I'm so sorry," Mrs. Ellery whispered. "I'm so sorry." She retreated into her house, the door closed, and the lock clicked. Zeke walked. Each step took effort, like moving through deep water. He rounded the corner of the ruined cabin. The ironwood tree rose ahead, massive and ancient. Its branches spread wide against the afternoon sky. A rope hung from the lowest branch. Just one rope, but he knew. He understood immediately what it meant. The frayed fibers swayed slightly in the breeze. Zeke stopped beneath it. He reached up slowly and touched the rope. It was rough against his fingers, coarse hemp, the kind that left burns. His knees gave out. He knelt in the ashes where his home had stood. His uniform collected gray dust. The ribbons on his chest meant nothing here. All the freedom he'd fought for overseas, all the battles he'd survived, and all the missions he'd completed, none of it mattered. None of it had protected the people he loved most. The sun began its descent toward the horizon. Golden light turned orange, then red. Shadows lengthened across the scorched earth. Distant voices carried on the wind. Zeke heard his name spoken in hushed tones. The town knew he'd returned. They were talking about it, wondering what he would do, waiting. Zeke remained motionless. He stared at the rope. He didn't move as the sky darkened. He didn't move as the first stars appeared. He stayed there, kneeling in the ruins, as night fell around him like a shroud. Sleep would not come. He knew it wouldn't, so he simply watched the rope sway in the darkness and waited for something inside him to break or harden. Pre-dawn brought no comfort. The sky held that uncertain color between black and blue, neither night nor morning. Zeke remained exactly where he'd been for hours, kneeling in the ashes, staring at the rope that still hung from the ironwood tree. His knees had gone numb. His uniform was covered in gray dust, but he didn't move. The rope swayed. A faint breeze made it twist, the frayed end drawing small circles in the air. Something shifted inside Zeke's chest, not breaking, but hardening. He drew a breath, deep, controlled, held it for a count of 4, and released it slowly through his nose. Another breath. 4 counts in, hold, 6 counts out. The pattern was automatic now, drilled into him during those early training sessions before they sent him into enemy territory, before he became the soldier who could lie motionless in wet grass for 8 hours, watching an enemy supply line, counting officers, and memorizing faces. His heartbeat slowed. The chaos in his mind began organizing itself into clear columns of information, facts, resources, and objectives. Zeke stood up. His legs protested, his muscles stiff from the long night, but he forced them to work. He walked to the corner of the cabin that hadn't completely collapsed, the back section where the stone foundation still held. The floorboards there were warped from heat, but intact. He knelt again, this time with purpose. His fingers found the third board from the wall, the one with the knot that looked solid but was actually loose. He'd installed this hiding place himself years ago, thinking he might need somewhere to keep important papers safe from fire or flood. The board lifted. Underneath, wrapped in oilcloth, was a box. Zeke pulled it out carefully. The metal container was cool against his palms. He unwrapped the cloth and opened it. Inside lay the tools of his trade: a compass, maps marked with grid coordinates from training exercises, wire cutters, a folding knife with a 5-inch blade, signal flares wrapped in waterproof paper, and lengths of thin cord designed for setting silent perimeter alarms. At the bottom, folded with careful precision, was a black scarf. Zeke lifted it slowly. The fabric was silk, taken from a parachute after his unit's first successful extraction. The men in his squad had started calling him Black Mamba after a mission in the Philippines. He'd infiltrated an enemy camp, disabled their radio equipment, and extracted intelligence without a single guard noticing until morning. Like the snake, he was silent, fast, precise, and invisible until the strike came. Someone had embroidered the nickname onto the corner of the scarf in small letters. He couldn't remember who. Maybe Davis, maybe Rodriguez. Both were dead now, buried in graves somewhere across the Pacific. Zeke set the box aside and stood, folding the scarf carefully. He needed information before anything else. Information required conversation, and conversation required appearing normal, controllable, and non-threatening. He changed into civilian clothes, simple work pants and a shirt that had survived in a trunk. The uniform he folded precisely and placed back in his duffel. Then he walked into town. Mid-morning found him standing outside Reverend Clay's small church. The white paint had yellowed with age. The cross above the door tilted slightly to the left. Zeke remembered attending services here as a boy, Mama Ruth's hand warm in his, her voice rising strong during the hymns. He knocked. Reverend Clay opened the door almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting. The old man's face was lined with exhaustion, and his eyes were red. "Ezekiel," he said quietly, "I wondered if you'd come." "Reverend, come in, please." The interior was dim and cool. Wooden pews lined both sides of a narrow aisle. Dust motes floated in the light from the single window. Clay led him to the front row and sat heavily, gesturing for Zeke to join him. "I'm sorry," Clay began. "Sorrier than I can say. Your family. Sarah was a good woman. Samuel was bright as a new penny. And Mama Ruth," his voice broke, "she was the strongest person I ever knew." Zeke said nothing. He waited. Clay seemed to understand. He folded his hands in his lap and spoke carefully. "The men who did this, they aren't just random troublemakers. They're organized and connected. The sheriff knows about their meetings. The mayor attends sometimes. They meet at the old sawmill on the edge of the woods when they have business to discuss." Zeke's eyes sharpened. "Who leads them?" The Reverend hesitated, then whispered the names, the leaders of the town, the men who held the power. He told Zeke about the meeting planned for that very night to celebrate their victory. As the sun set, Zeke returned to his ruined home. He didn't cry. He didn't pray. He took the black scarf and tied it around his head. He took the thin cord and the knife. He moved toward the sawmill, not as a grieving man, but as the Black Mamba. Inside the sawmill, the 11 men laughed, drinking and boasting of their cruelty. They didn't hear the floorboards creak. They didn't see the shadow moving through the rafters. One by one, the lights went out. One by one, the men were silenced. No gunshots rang out. There was only the sound of the wind and the occasional snap of a rope. When dawn broke over Pine Hollow, the town awoke to a sight that would haunt them forever. The leaders were gone, replaced by a row of swaying figures under the ironwood tree. And Ezekiel Turner was gone too, leaving behind nothing but a black silk scarf fluttering from a branch and a town that finally understood the meaning of consequence. "Mr. Crawford owns the cotton mill," Reverend Clay continued, his voice barely a whisper. "He provides the meeting space. Judge Patterson signs off on anything they need legal cover for." "Where do they meet?" Zeke's voice was calm and flat. It was the voice of a man calculating coordinates, not a man consumed by rage. "Different places. They rotate to avoid attention, but they have a main gathering spot. It's the old sawmill out past the swamp. Nobody uses it anymore. It's been abandoned since the mill owner died back in '39. "How many?" Clay hesitated. 11 regular members, the leadership. There are dozens more who follow their orders, but the main group is 11. "Names," Ezekiel demanded. Clay's hands tightened on each other. "Ezekiel, please. If you go after them, they'll kill you. They'll burn what's left of your property. They'll make an example out of you that will terrify folks for a generation. You can't fight this entire system alone." "Names," Zeke repeated, his gaze unwavering. The Reverend closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet with tears. "Sheriff Braxton, Mayor Whitley, Mr. Crawford, Judge Patterson, Deputy Simmons, Dr. Hartwell, Mr. Morrison from the bank, the Cassidy brothers, both of them, Mr. Pewitt, and Deacon Morse." Zeke committed each name to memory. 11 men. It was the same number of ribbons on his dress uniform sitting in the duffel bag at his ruined home. "They meet tonight," Clay added quietly. "Midnight at the sawmill. They're planning something. I heard talk about making sure no other families get ideas about stepping out of line." "Thank you, Reverend." "Ezekiel, please, don't do anything that will get you killed. Your family wouldn't want—" "My family is dead," Zeke said as he stood up. "What they would want doesn't matter anymore." He left Clay sitting alone in the empty church. Afternoon light slanted through the pine trees as Zeke walked the perimeter of the swamp. He had hunted these woods as a boy and knew every game trail and hidden pool. The sawmill sat on the far side, accessible by one main road and 2 smaller paths that crossed the wetlands on rotting boardwalks. Zeke moved silently, his military training taking over. He avoided dry leaves and brittle twigs. He placed his feet carefully, testing each step before committing his weight. He memorized sight lines, cover positions, and escape routes. The sawmill finally came into view through the trees. The building leaned badly, its roof partially collapsed on the north side. Rust covered the old cutting equipment and vines had claimed the walls, but the main floor space was clear. Someone had swept it recently. Fresh boot prints marked the dusty ground. Zeke circled wide, staying in the tree line. He found a position 50 yards out with clear visibility and settled into a depression between 2 fallen logs. Then he waited. The sun crawled across the sky, but Zeke did not move. His breathing stayed controlled. 4 counts in, hold, 6 counts out. His mind worked through the tactical problem like an equation. 11 men, 1 building, limited exits, predictable patterns. He had faced worse odds in the Pacific. As evening arrived, a truck rumbled down the main road. Zeke watched through a gap in the logs as 2 men climbed out. They were the Cassidy brothers, recognizable by their matching builds and red hair. They carried boxes into the sawmill, lanterns, chairs, and a folding table. Another vehicle came 20 minutes later, then another. By full dark, 6 vehicles sat outside the sawmill. Light glowed from the windows. Voices carried across the swamp, muffled but celebratory. Zeke waited until the last vehicle arrived. Sheriff Braxton's patrol car, unmistakable even in the darkness. Then he withdrew silently, retracing his path through the swamp. Nightfall found him back at the ironwood tree. The rope still hung there, a dark line against the darker sky. Stars emerged overhead, the same stars he had navigated by during night operations. The same stars that had watched while his family died. Zeke pulled the black scarf from his pocket. He tied it around his left wrist, pulling the knot tight with his teeth. The fabric felt right, like putting on armor. Ezekiel Turner, the husband, the father, the son, was gone, buried with Sarah and Samuel and Mama Ruth. The black Mamba had returned. He settled against the tree's massive trunk and closed his eyes. He wasn't sleeping. He was resting and preparing. Midnight was hours away. He would need every advantage, every edge, and every lesson learned in 4 years of war. The rope swayed above him in the darkness. At midnight it would serve a different purpose. The sawmill loomed against the night sky like a broken tooth. Zeke crouched in the underbrush 50 yards out, his breathing controlled and silent. The watch on his wrist showed 11:45 p.m. Inside the building, lantern light spilled through gaps in the weathered walls, casting long shadows across the clearing. Voices drifted through the darkness, laughter and the clink of glass bottles. Below, 11 men sat in a rough circle. Lanterns hung from hooks, their flames casting dancing light across weathered faces. Zeke recognized them all. Sheriff Braxton, with his gut hanging over his belt. Mayor Whitley, thin and sharp-faced. The Cassidy brothers. Judge Patterson, looking dignified despite the company he kept. Mr. Crawford stood in the center speaking. "Can't have them thinking they have rights. That Turner boy coming back from the war, his family getting ideas. It was necessary, a message, and the message is clear now." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. "We keep them scared," Crawford continued. "Keep them in their place. That's how we maintain order. That's how things stay proper." Zeke's jaw tightened, but he forced his breathing to remain steady. Emotion was the enemy of precision. He had planned this like every mission overseas, working backwards from the objective. The goal wasn't chaos. It was total control over 11 men who believed they were untouchable. The first flare ignited right on schedule. The distant whoosh and sudden bright flash drew every head toward the window. Zeke had positioned it to look like vehicle headlights or someone approaching with a torch. "The hell?" Deputy Simmons moved toward the door. The second flare went off on the opposite side of the clearing, then the third. Confusion rippled through the group. Men stood up, reaching for weapons. Shotguns leaning against the wall and pistols in belt holsters. Their attention was fractured. Zeke dropped the first smoke canister through a gap in the roof. It was military gear salvaged from his kit. It hit the floor with a metallic clunk and began spewing thick gray smoke. The lanterns became dim halos. Men started coughing and stumbling, calling out to each other. Outside, Braxton shouted, "Get outside!" They rushed for the door in a panicked cluster. The first man through, Mr. Morrison from the bank, hit Zeke's tripwire and went down hard. The man behind him tripped over him. The confusion multiplied. Zeke moved through the smoke like a ghost. His training had included operations in complete darkness. He knew exactly where everyone had been sitting and could track them by their shouts. He took Deputy Simmons first. The man had separated from the group, moving toward the side door. Zeke came up behind him silently and wrapped the cord around his wrists before Simmons even knew he was there. A pressure point on the neck, non-lethal, learned from his combat instructor, made Simmons slump. Zeke lowered him quietly, secured his ankles, and moved on. The Cassidy brothers stumbled out the main door together. Zeke was waiting in the darkness. He used their own momentum against them with a sweep of the leg and a controlled fall. He had them bound in under 30 seconds. The smoke began clearing. The remaining men regrouped near the vehicles, coughing with weapons raised. 8 left. "Show yourself," Judge Patterson demanded, his voice shaking. Zeke triggered the final distraction, a rock thrown to hit the patrol car's hood with a loud clang. All 8 men spun toward the sound. Zeke took Mayor Whitley and Dr. Hartwell together, emerging from the shadows and using precise strikes to sensitive nerve clusters. Both dropped, and their hands and ankles were bound before they could recover. Mr. Pewitt fired his shotgun blindly into the darkness. The blast was deafening, but Zeke was already moving, staying low. He came up behind Pewitt, struck the weapon from his hands, and had him restrained before the echoes faded. Sheriff Braxton tried to organize a defense. "Back to back! Cover all directions!" But military tactics required training. These men had none. They clustered together, weapons pointing outward, their voices rising in fear. Zeke used that fear. He moved through the shadows at the edge of visibility, letting them catch glimpses of him. A shape here, movement there. Their shots went wild, wasting ammunition. When they paused to reload, he struck. Crawford went down, then Deacon Morse, then Judge Patterson, who tried to run but only made it 6 steps. Sheriff Braxton was last. The big man stood alone in the clearing, his revolver empty, breathing hard. He turned in slow circles. "Come out and face me," Braxton shouted. "Fight like a man!" Zeke stepped into the lantern light. He held no weapon. His expression was completely calm. Braxton's eyes widened. "Turner? You're supposed to be dead." "Like my wife, my son, my mother." Zeke's voice was quiet. Braxton raised his fists. "You're going to hang for this. We're the law here. You can't—" Zeke moved. One strike to the solar plexus, precise and controlled. Braxton doubled over, gasping. A second strike to the back of the neck, and the sheriff collapsed. Within minutes, all 11 men lay bound on the ground, their wrists secured to each other in a long chain. They were conscious but coughing and bleeding from minor cuts. They were alive, exactly as Zeke intended. He stood over them silently. He gave no words or explanations. He simply gestured toward the swamp path with his knife. "You can't make us," Crawford started. Zeke's expression didn't change. He simply waited. One by one they struggled to their feet. Bound together, they had no choice but to move as a group. Zeke walked behind them, a silent and watchful presence as they stumbled toward the dark tree line. The march through the swamp took hours. The bound men struggled on the narrow paths, tripping over roots and splashing through shallow water. Mosquitoes swarmed and frogs croaked from hidden pools. Mist rose from the water as the temperature dropped, turning the world gray and formless. Zeke said nothing the entire time. He simply kept them moving. When someone fell, he waited. When someone begged, he ignored it. When someone threatened, he remained silent. The darkness began lifting as they reached familiar ground. The ironwood tree emerged from the pre-dawn gloom like a monument. The rope still hung there, exactly as Zeke had left it. The men saw it. Understanding finally dawned on their faces. Some began to pray out loud, their voices trembling. Others began to curse, while a few simply wept in silence. Zeke worked methodically. He had prepared additional ropes earlier, hidden in the thick undergrowth. Now he retrieved them and began securing the men to the ironwood tree's massive trunk, arranging them in a circle facing outward. He tied their bound wrists to branches at shoulder height, forcing them to remain standing. "Please," Judge Patterson whispered, his dignity gone. "Please, we didn't mean for things to go this far." Zeke looked at him. He didn't speak. He just looked. The judge fell silent immediately. The work took time. Zeke moved with careful precision, testing each knot and checking their circulation. This wasn't an act of random cruelty. It was justice, cold, calculated, and deeply symbolic. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The 11 men hung suspended against the very tree they had used to spread terror, the same tree that had held his family's bodies only 2 nights before. Zeke stood back and studied his work. His face showed nothing, no satisfaction, no anger, and no grief. It was a careful assessment, like an engineer reviewing a completed project. He left them there as the morning grew warmer. He returned to the sawmill and carefully staged the scene, overturning chairs and scattering weapons to make it look like signs of internal conflict. He wanted them to think the organization had turned on itself. If the investigation went in circles, it might protect the community from immediate retaliation. By mid-morning, he returned to the tree and cut them down. They collapsed in a heap, some unconscious and others traumatized, but all of them alive. He left them there for someone else to find. Then he walked to the opposite side of his property, where 3 fresh graves waited. He had dug them the previous evening before beginning his preparations. Now he lowered the bodies of his family into the earth with gentle hands. Sarah first, then Samuel, and finally Mama Ruth. He filled the graves slowly, patting down each shovelful of dirt. No words or prayers were spoken. It was the simple act of burial, giving them the dignity that had been denied to them. When he finished, he knelt between the 3 mounds. His head was bowed and his hands rested on his thighs. The black scarf hung loose around his wrist now, the knot untied. Footsteps approached from behind, slow, deliberate boots crunching on dry grass. Zeke didn't turn. He had heard the approach minutes ago and recognized the gait. He expected this. Sheriff Elias Redden stopped 10 feet away. This wasn't Braxton. Redden was from the next county over, a different kind of lawman. Ezekiel Turner, Redden said quietly. Zeke remained kneeling. Found 11 men tied to a tree this morning, Redden continued. They're telling some wild stories, claims about smoke and shadows, military tactics, and a ghost in the darkness. He paused. They also found your family's bodies in the county morgue. The coroner has been holding them, waiting for next of kin. Zeke said nothing. Redden moved closer. When he spoke again, his voice was lower and more urgent. You've started a war larger than you know. Sheriff Elias Redden stood perfectly still, his hands held away from his sides with palms open. The gesture was deliberate, the kind of movement a man makes when he wants to prove he carries no threat. Zeke remained kneeling between the graves, his eyes fixed on the fresh earth. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the soil. I'm not here to arrest you, Redden said quietly. If I were, I'd have brought deputies and a warrant. I came alone because what I have to say can't be official. Zeke's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. I've been watching this county for 7 years, Redden continued. Watching good people disappear, watching investigations get buried, and watching files vanish from courthouses. His voice dropped even lower. I've been collecting evidence the whole time, building a case no one wanted built. The words hung in the air. A crow called from somewhere in the distance. Those 11 men you dealt with? Redden took a slow breath. They weren't the leadership. They were enforcers and front men. The real power sits in state offices, courthouses, and bank boardrooms. You cut off a few fingers, but the hand is still reaching. Zeke finally turned his head. His eyes were hollow, empty of everything except a terrible, controlled focus. Redden met his gaze without flinching. I have files, names, and connections, everything I've gathered over 7 years of pretending not to notice. He gestured toward the road. Come to my office. I'll show you what you're really facing. Why? Zeke's voice was rough from disuse. Because they killed your family to send a message, Redden said. And because I'm tired of pretending the law works when it's rotted from the inside. The sheriff's office sat on the edge of the next county, a modest brick building that shared space with the fire department. Redden led Zeke through the back entrance as dusk settled. There were no witnesses and no official record of the visit. Inside, the office was sparse. Redden locked the door and moved to his desk, selecting a small brass key from his ring. I keep the important files here, he said, unlocking the bottom drawer. The ones that would get me killed if anyone knew they existed. He withdrew a thick folder with worn edges. Inside were dozens of pages of typed reports and handwritten notes. Each page was marked with initials instead of full names. Redden spread them across the desk. H.B. Judge Harland Boone. He sits on the state circuit court and runs the entire northern Alabama operation. His finger moved to another page. J.M. State Senator James Markham. He controls funding and ensures investigations die in committee. R.C. Robert Carlyle. Owner of 3 cotton mills. He provides the employment leverage. Anyone who talks loses their job and their home. Zeke leaned over the desk, studying the documents. His expression remained flat, but his hands gripped the desk edge hard enough to turn his knuckles white. "There are maybe 40 men total," Redden said, "spread across 5 counties. They meet quarterly and move money through shell companies. The 11 you took down were local muscle. They are expendable. The real leadership won't even notice they're gone." "Then they'll notice what comes next," Zeke said quietly. Redden shook his head. "You can't fight them all alone. They have resources, political protection, and the ability to mobilize law enforcement across the state. Take these, study them, but then you need to leave Pine Hollow. Go north. Contact federal authorities who might actually listen." "I'm not running." "It's not running, it's surviving long enough to—" "I'm not running," Zeke repeated. His voice was completely calm and certain. Redden studied him for a long moment. Then he pulled out a separate stack of copies and slid them across the desk. "Then at least know what you're walking into." Zeke took the papers and tucked them inside his jacket. "They'll retaliate," Redden warned. "Not just against you, but against anyone they think helped you. They will target the whole community to send a message. Then maybe it's time someone bled them dry." Redden turned back. "You're talking about war." "They started it when they put ropes around my family's necks." The 2 men stood in silence. Finally, Redden nodded slowly. "If you're staying, then you need to be smarter than them. You need to be 3 steps ahead, and you need to know who to trust, which is almost nobody." Midnight found Zeke back at his property. The ruins of his home stood black against the starlight. A figure detached itself from the tree line, moving nervously with hands raised. "Zeke, it's me, Jeremiah." Zeke's hand went to his knife. He recognized the voice. Jeremiah Cole, who had grown up 3 houses down. Jeremiah stepped into the moonlight, his face drawn with fear. "I need to talk to you," Jeremiah said, his hands shaking. "I've been working for them, not by choice. They threatened my sister and said they'd burn her out if I didn't cooperate. They made me watch and report on who was talking about voting rights. I didn't know about your family, I swear I didn't, but I know who ordered it. Judge Harlan Boone." The name settled in Zeke's mind. He remembered the distinguished man in the expensive suit who spoke at his send-off ceremony about patriotism. "Boone runs everything," Jeremiah continued. "He decides who lives and who dies. And they know you're alive, Zeke. They know what you did to those 11 men, and they're coming. I heard them planning it tonight. They're sending people to—" Gunshots cracked through the night. Headlights swept across the property. Jeremiah grabbed Zeke's arm. "This way. The swamp paths. I know them better than anyone." More shots rang out as Zeke let Jeremiah pull him toward the tree line. They crashed through the underbrush and splashed through shallow water. "Here!" Jeremiah yanked Zeke into a thick stand of palmetto. "Get down! Stay quiet!" They pressed themselves flat. Flashlight beams swept overhead as men cursed and searched. The search continued for hours before the sounds finally faded. Dawn began to lighten the sky, gray and uncertain. Zeke pushed aside the fronds carefully. "They're gone," Jeremiah whispered. They emerged slowly, their joints stiff. Zeke's legs ached as they began walking. "Where are we going?" Zeke asked. "Somewhere safe," Jeremiah said, moving ahead. "There's a group, veterans like you. They've been protecting folks and fighting back quietly." Zeke said nothing. Trust was something he had buried with his family. After nearly an hour of walking, they reached an abandoned barn hidden behind a wall of kudzu. Jeremiah knocked in a specific pattern. The door opened a crack, then swung wider. A tall man with a clear military bearing stood there. His eyes swept over Zeke, taking in the mud, the posture, and the watchful gaze. "I brought the one everyone is talking about," Jeremiah said. The man in the barn looked at Zeke. "We've been waiting for a man with your skills. The question is, are you ready to stop being a ghost and start being a soldier again?" "You're Turner," the man said. It wasn't a question. "I am. Come inside, both of you." The barn's interior was surprisingly organized. Crates served as chairs and tables while maps hung on the walls. Radio equipment sat in one corner covered with heavy canvas. 3 other people waited inside, 2 men and a woman, all watching Zeke with cautious interest. The tall man who had opened the door gestured around the space. "Welcome to the Ironwood Circle. I'm Miles Carter. That's Reuben Shaw, our medic. Nora Langston handles communications, and you've already met our sometimes reliable informant, Jeremiah." Jeremiah flinched at the description, but said nothing. Miles studied Zeke for a long moment. "We heard what you did to those 11 men. The whole county is talking about it. Some folks are scared, some are celebrating quietly, and some," he paused, "some are wondering if you're going to get everyone killed." "That's not my intention," Zeke said. "Intentions don't mean much when you're dealing with people who will burn down a whole neighborhood just to make a point." Miles crossed his arms. "But we're not here to lecture you. We're here because we're fighting the same fight, just with different methods." Reuben Shaw stepped forward. He was stockier than Miles, with gentle eyes and careful movements. "You're hurt," he said, noticing how Zeke favored his left side. "Let me look at that." "It's nothing. It's something if you can't move right when you need to." Reuben's voice was firm but kind. "Sit down, let me work." Zeke hesitated, then lowered himself onto a crate. Reuben examined the bruising along his ribs where he'd crashed through the underbrush during the escape. His hands were professional and efficient. Miles leaned forward, studying the documents. His expression grew darker with each page. "I knew it went higher than the local thugs, but this—" He looked up at Nora. "This is Judge Boone, Senator Markham, half the county commissioners." Nora came over, examining the papers carefully. "This matches what we've been piecing together from radio chatter, but Redden actually documented it. Names, dates, and money transfers." "We have more," Miles said. He moved to a trunk in the corner and pulled out a rolled map. When he spread it on the table, it showed all of northern Alabama marked with different colored pins. Red pins are confirmed leadership. Blue pins are their meeting locations. Yellow pins are families we've evacuated or protected. The map was covered in pins, dozens of them, a coordinated network spanning 5 counties. "We've been tracking them for 8 months, Miles explained. "Ever since we all came home from the war and realized nothing had changed, that the freedom we fought for didn't extend to our own communities. We started small, warning families, helping people disappear before raids, and sabotaging equipment used for intimidation." "How many families have you helped?" Zeke asked. 17, Reuben said quietly. "Moved them north, got them train tickets and a chance to start over somewhere. The group doesn't run everything." Jeremiah spoke up from near the door. "They also stopped 3 lynchings. They showed up with enough armed men that the mobs backed down. They even burned down the printing press that was publishing hate propaganda." "We fight smart," Miles said. "Not loud. We don't give them targets or martyrs to rally around." He looked at Zeke directly. "What you did was loud, very loud, and now they're coming down hard on everyone." "I know." "Do you?" Nora's voice was sharp. "We have reports of roadblocks going up and searches of homes without warrants. They're looking for you, and they're tearing apart the whole community to find you." "Then I'll give myself up." "No," Miles said firmly. "That's not how this works. You die, and you become a story they tell to keep everyone else scared. You run, and it's the same thing. What we need is to dismantle them completely, so there's nothing left to retaliate with." Zeke studied the map again. "How?" "Evidence," Nora said. "Real documentation and testimony. Something that forces federal intervention. The local law is corrupted, but if we can get proof to Washington, they'll have to act." "We need the big fish," Miles added. "We need to catch them in the act and document their plans." He tapped the map where a blue pin marked Judge Boone's property. "They're meeting tomorrow night here." "Then we go there," Zeke said. "We observe," Miles corrected. "We record and gather evidence. We don't engage unless absolutely necessary." The morning stretched into the afternoon as they planned. Zeke shared what he knew about surveillance from his military training. Miles outlined the routes to Boone's property. Nora explained the recording equipment, a wire recorder that was barely portable but functional. Reuben prepared medical supplies. By mid-afternoon, they were ready. The drive to the observation point took 2 hours. They used back roads and parked an old farm truck a mile from Boone's property, approaching on foot through dense woods. The judge's house was large and well-maintained. A separate carriage house sat behind it, which Boone used as his private office. They settled into position on a wooded hillside. Nora set up the wire recorder while Miles used binoculars. Zeke simply watched, his eyes trained for observation. Cars began arriving as dusk fell, expensive vehicles driven by men in suits. Zeke recognized Senator Markham and Carlyle, the mill owner. 12 men total entered the carriage house. Heavy curtains prevented anyone from seeing in, but Nora adjusted her equipment. "Give me a minute," she whispered. Static crackled through her headphones, then voices came through. Nora's expression sharpened, and she began taking notes in shorthand. "They're discussing retaliation plans," she whispered, "talking about making examples and targeting anyone who might be sheltering Turner." Zeke's jaw tightened. "Boone's leading the discussion," Nora continued. "He's saying they need to reassert control, that the Turner situation showed weakness." The recording continued for nearly an hour. Specific targets were identified and plans outlined in terrible detail. Finally, the meeting ended and the men drove away. They waited another 30 minutes before packing up. "We got it," Nora said once they were safely away. "Clear audio, names, and plans." Back at the barn, the group gathered as Nora played back the recording. Boone's cultured tones described acts of terror with the same casual ease he might use discussing crop yields. "This is it," Miles said. "They ate simple food, cornbread and beans, sharing from a single pot." "What's next?" Jeremiah asked. "We need to verify the other targets they mentioned and warn those families," Miles said. "Then we figure out how to get this recording to the Justice Department." As the evening grew late, Miles suggested sleeping in shifts. "I'll take first watch," Zeke said. Within minutes, exhaustion claimed the others. The night was quiet at first, but then Zeke heard dogs barking in the distance. They were tracking dogs, and they were getting closer. He didn't wake the others until he was certain, but his hand moved to his knife. The hunt was continuing. The barking faded just before dawn. Zeke waited another hour before shaking Miles awake. They were close, tracking dogs about half a mile out before they turned. Miles was instantly alert. "They're sweeping the area. We moved today to stay ahead of them." The group gathered their equipment. Nora spread the map as they ate a quick breakfast of dried fruit. "We need to divide our efforts," Miles said. "We have audio, but we need financial proof. Documentation that shows money flowing from businesses into violence." "The mill," Jeremiah said. "There's an accountant there, Harold Finch. He keeps 2 sets of books. He keeps the real ledgers at his home on Cypress Street." "I'll go," Reuben volunteered. "I can pick the lock. Take Jeremiah. He knows the layout." Zeke studied the map. "If Boone is coordinating with the senator, there will be communication records. The train depot keeps copies for 30 days in a storage shed." "I've seen the clerk filing them there," Nora said. "Miles, you come with me," Zeke said. "Nora, you stay here and transcribe the recording. We need written documentation to go with the audio." They moved efficiently. Reuben and Jeremiah left in the truck, while Zeke and Miles headed out on foot toward the depot. The storage shed was a small wooden structure behind the main station. The platform was empty. Miles kept watch while Zeke worked the lock. It opened in seconds. Inside, filing cabinets were stuffed with folders of thin yellow papers. "Start at the most recent dates," Miles whispered. "Look for messages to the state capitol." Zeke pulled everything from the past month, scanning quickly for names he recognized. Boone, Markham, Carlyle, they were all there. He found a telegram from Boone to Senator Markham dated 3 days before Zeke's family was killed. It read, "Situation requires immediate example. Turner family identified as primary target. Proceed with coordinated action." Zeke's hand stayed steady as he carefully folded the telegram and pocketed it. He continued searching, finding more communications about shipments, references to disciplinary action, and coded language that clearly meant violence but was phrased to seem legitimate. "We've got 5 minutes," Miles whispered from the door. Zeke gathered everything relevant, about 30 pages in total. He reorganized the remaining papers to hide the gaps, then slipped out. Miles locked the door behind them. They walked away calmly, looking like just two men taking a morning stroll, and disappeared into the woods before anyone arrived for work. Back at the barn, Reuben and Jeremiah had already returned. 3 heavy ledgers sat on the work table, their pages filled with neat columns of figures. "Finch wasn't home," Reuben explained. "He left early. We had the place to ourselves." Nora had finished transcribing key portions of the audio recording. Now she examined the ledgers, her eyes moving quickly across the entries. "This is it. This is everything. Look, payments to security personnel that match the dates of known attacks, equipment purchases that align with reported incidents, even payments to law enforcement for special services." "This proves everything," Nora said quietly. "The organization, the funding, the political protection, all of it." "It proves they're criminals," Miles said. "Now, we need to get it to someone who can act." "Agent Collier," Zeke said. "Redden mentioned him. He's a federal investigator working quietly, arriving tomorrow on the 11 o'clock train." "Can we trust him?" Jeremiah asked. "Can we trust anyone?" Miles countered. "But if Redden vouches for him and if he's federal, he's our best option." By midday, they had organized everything into a comprehensive file, photographs of key documents, the wire recording, written testimony, and a complete map of the network. "We need to stay mobile," Zeke said. "If they're sweeping the area, this barn won't be safe much longer." Miles agreed. "But first, the Harrisons. They're on Boone's list from the recording. We heard him name them specifically. They've got a raid planned for tonight." The Harrison family lived on a small farm 3 miles south. Thomas Harrison was a school teacher, and his wife Clara took in sewing. They had 4 children, the youngest barely 2 years old. Zeke and Miles approached carefully that afternoon. The house looked peaceful. Laundry hung on a line and children played in the yard. Thomas answered the door cautiously, but his expression changed when he recognized Miles. "We need to talk," Miles said quietly. Inside the modest kitchen, Zeke explained what they'd learned. Thomas's face went pale, and Clara gripped the edge of the table. "When?" Thomas asked. "Tonight after midnight. They're planning to burn your house and make it look like an accident." "Dear God," Clara's voice shook. "The children." "Pack what you can carry," Miles said. "We have a place you can stay for a few days until we can get you on a train north." "We can't just leave," Thomas protested. "This is our home. My students—" "Your students need you alive," Zeke said. His voice was gentle but firm. "Your children need you alive. Right now, staying here means dying. We're offering you a chance to live." Thomas looked at his wife. She nodded slowly, tears in her eyes. They helped the family pack quickly. Essential documents, clothing, and a few precious photographs. The children were told they were going on an adventure. Within an hour, they were ready. Reuben met them with the truck at a prearranged location. The Harrisons climbed into the back, covered with canvas. They would stay at a different safe house. As they drove away, Thomas gripped Zeke's hand through the canvas. Thank you for warning us." Zeke nodded, but said nothing. What was there to say? That this was happening to dozens of families? That the system designed to protect them instead hunted them? They returned to the barn as night fell. Nora had prepared a simple meal of beans, rice, and strong coffee. They ate quietly, exhausted. The evidence lay spread across the work table, undeniable proof of systematic violence. Tomorrow they would hand it to Agent Collier. Tomorrow they would take the first real step toward dismantling the machine. "Get some rest," Miles said. "We need to be sharp tomorrow." They bedded down on the floor again. The barn was cold and the blankets were thin, but none of them complained. Zeke lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind replayed the telegrams he'd read and the casual way Boone had ordered his family's death. The bureaucratic language used to describe murder made his blood run cold. He dozed fitfully. Nightmares came in fragments. The ironwood tree, Sarah's face, Samuel's laughter cut short. He jerked awake repeatedly, disoriented, reaching for weapons that weren't there. Each time he forced himself to breathe slowly, to return to the present. But the sense of danger never left. It crawled along his spine, persistent and familiar. The same feeling he'd had before ambushes overseas. Something was coming. He knew it with the certainty that had kept him alive through the war. He just didn't know what yet. Dawn arrived, gray and cold. Zeke woke stiff, his shoulder aching from the hard floor. The others were already stirring, moving quietly. Miles stood by the barn door, watching the road through a gap. Nora sorted through the documents one final time. Reuben cleaned his rifle methodically. "Today we hand it off," Miles said quietly. "Today we actually do something that matters." There was real hope in his voice, the kind that came from believing the system could work if you pushed hard enough. Zeke wanted to believe it too. "We split up going into town," Zeke said. "We don't all arrive at the depot together. Nora and Reuben will go first. Position near the station house and watch for trouble. Miles, you take the south approach," Zeke continued. "Keep eyes on the platform itself. Jeremiah and I will come from the east with the documents. If anything seems wrong, we scatter and regroup tonight." They'd planned for this, and everyone knew their role. Miles checked his watch. "Train arrives at 11:00. Collier should be in the third passenger car." Jeremiah approached Zeke as he was securing the documents in a satchel. The younger man's hands were shaking and his eyes looked hollow. "Zeke," Jeremiah said quietly, "I need to tell you something. They found me 2 nights ago after I helped you escape. They know I was with you." "What did they do?" "Boone himself came. Said they'd kill my mother and sisters. Said I had to cooperate or watch them burn." Jeremiah's hands clenched. "I tried to mislead them, sent them looking in the wrong places, but I think they know. I think they're tracking us." Zeke placed a hand on Jeremiah's shoulder. "You did what you had to do to protect your family. I understand that. But we have a mission. We'll figure out what comes next later." They slipped out of the barn and moved toward town. By 10:30, they were in position near the depot. Zeke saw Reuben reading a newspaper and Nora sitting on a bench with a basket. Everything seemed normal, but Zeke's instincts screamed. The tension in the air reminded him of an ambush. The train whistle sounded. The locomotive hissed to a stop, right on schedule. Passengers began to disembark. A businessman, a woman with children, an elderly man, but no Agent Collier. Zeke scanned every face. Then he heard it. A single gunshot, distant but unmistakable, from the far side of the train near the baggage car. Screams erupted. Passengers scattered. Zeke moved forward, but Jeremiah grabbed his arm. "Wait, look!" Smoke was rising from the north, thick and black coming from the direction of the barn. Everything happened at once. Reuben broke from his position, sprinting toward the smoke, and Nora followed. People on the platform panicked. Zeke ran, too, the satchel clutched tight. They cut through an alley, racing toward the barn. Gunfire cracked ahead, coordinated fire. It was an ambush. Zeke saw Reuben go down first, his body jerking backward before crumpling. Nora screamed and dove behind a water trough. Miles appeared, returning fire to cover their retreat. "Get out!" Miles shouted at Zeke. "Get!" A shot hit Miles in the chest. He staggered, fired one more round, and collapsed. Zeke felt the impact before he heard the sound. A bullet punched through his left shoulder, spinning him sideways. Pain exploded through his arm. The satchel fell from his grip. Jeremiah grabbed it and dragged Zeke toward a drainage ditch. They tumbled into it together, water soaking through their clothes. Zeke's shoulder burned like fire. Blood mixed with the muddy water. "Stay down," Jeremiah hissed. Footsteps sounded above them. Men were searching and calling to each other. Through his pain, Zeke saw them. 3 men loading boxes into a truck bed. The documents, the evidence, everything they'd gathered was being taken away. "No," he tried to say, but Jeremiah clamped a hand over his mouth. "We have to go now." They crawled through the ditch, moving away from the voices. Zeke's shoulder screamed. Jeremiah pulled him into the swamp as they reached the edge of town. Behind them, Pine Hollow burned. Reuben, Nora, and Miles were likely dead. All their work was gone. Zeke stumbled, his legs giving out. Jeremiah caught him and kept him moving. Fever was already setting in as the infection spread through his wounded shoulder. "Keep moving," Jeremiah urged. "Just a little further." They finally stopped deep in the swamp where the black water ran still and the trees grew so thick the sky disappeared. Zeke collapsed against a cypress trunk, gasping for breath. His shoulder throbbed with a rhythmic heat, and his vision blurred. Rain began to fall, softly at first, then harder, turning into cold drops that soaked through their clothes and made everything worse. Jeremiah tore strips from his own shirt, trying to bandage the wound. His hands shook badly. "Stay with me," Jeremiah begged. "Please, just stay with me." The rain fell harder as night came early, darkness pressing in from all sides. Somewhere in the distance, dogs barked. Searchers, perhaps, coming to finish what they'd started. Jeremiah pulled Zeke deeper into the shadows, covering them both with fallen branches and wet moss. They had no choice but to stay hidden until morning. Zeke drifted in and out of consciousness. Sarah's face appeared in his fever dreams, followed by Samuel's laughter and the ironwood tree swaying in a wind that smelled of smoke and blood. Everything they'd built and everyone who had helped had been destroyed in one coordinated strike. The machine had won again. The rain had softened to a drizzle by the time the dawn light filtered through the canopy. It was gray and weak, barely enough to see by. Water dripped steadily from cypress branches overhead, creating a constant rhythm in the silence. Jeremiah hadn't slept at all. He had spent the entire night watching Zeke's labored breathing and listening for searchers who never arrived. Now, with enough light to work by, he examined the shoulder wound. The flesh was swollen and hot to the touch. Red streaks spread outward from the entry point. Infection was setting in fast. Jeremiah remembered the medic's words. "Clean it first. Pressure to stop the bleeding. Keep it elevated." But Reuben was dead. They were all dead. Jeremiah pushed the thought away and focused on what he could control. He tore more strips from his ragged shirt and used Spanish moss to draw out the infection, a trick he'd seen the old folks use. Zeke stirred, mumbling something incoherent. His eyes opened briefly, glazed with fever. "Sarah," he whispered. "Where's Sarah?" "She's not here, Zeke. You're in the swamp. You got shot, remember?" "Samuel needs his breakfast. He gets hungry early. Always hungry, that boy." Zeke's voice was distant, lost in a memory. "Mama Ruth wants to hang the washing. Says the rain's clearing." Jeremiah pressed the moss bandage more firmly. "You need to stay still. Don't move." But Zeke wasn't listening. "I told her I'd be home by supper, promised her. Can't break a promise to Sarah. She'll worry." His body trembled violently. Jeremiah soaked a cloth in cool swamp water and placed it on Zeke's forehead. "Samuel wants to learn to read," Zeke said suddenly, his voice clearer. "Smart boy. So smart. I bought him a book in Mobile. He loves trains." Jeremiah watched helplessly as tears slid down Zeke's face. "They're gone, Zeke," he whispered. "Aren't they all gone? I wasn't here. I wasn't here to protect them." "No," Jeremiah said firmly. "Don't think about that now. Save your strength." But Zeke's eyes were open now, staring up through the canopy. "I should have been here. Should have never left. What good was any of it? Fighting overseas while they died here. You couldn't have known." "I should have known." Zeke's voice hardened despite the fever. This system was always going to come for them, for all of us. He tried to sit up, his good arm pushing against the mud. Jeremiah held him down gently. "Easy. Don't move yet. No more waiting." Zeke said. No more hiding. They took everything. His eyes were burning now, fever and fury mixing into something sharp and focused. Even weakened, there was a clarity in his gaze. I see them, he said quietly. Sarah, Samuel, Mama Ruth. They're telling me not to give up, not to let this end here. The morning stretched on. Jeremiah kept changing the bandages and watching the swamp. Around noon, he heard movement in the brush. He grabbed a broken branch, ready to fight, but then Miles pushed through the palmetto fronds, his face covered in mud. Behind him came Nora, limping badly, and Reuben, his arm wrapped in blood-stained cloth. Jeremiah nearly collapsed with relief. I thought I saw you go down. You saw us fall, Miles said, but we ain't dead yet. He looked at Zeke. How bad? Infected fever. He's been hallucinating all morning. Reuben knelt beside Zeke immediately, his training taking over. He examined the wound, his face grim. The bullet went clean through, which is good. But the infection... He pulled actual medical supplies from a small pack. We need to clean this properly. While Reuben worked, the others built a shelter. Miles cut branches and Nora spread a salvaged tarp. They worked quickly, falling into the coordinated rhythm of a unit. Reuben cleaned Zeke's wound with alcohol, making the veteran scream even in his unconscious state. He'll live if we can keep him still for a day or two, Reuben said. We don't have a day or two, Miles said quietly. I circled back after the ambush, got close enough to hear Boone and his people. They're meeting tonight at a lodge near the state border. They're finalizing retaliation operations against every family they suspect of resistance. I know that place, Jeremiah said. I heard them mention it. I can help, Zeke said weakly. His eyes were open again. I'm going tonight, even if I have to crawl there. Silence fell over the shelter. Miles spoke first. I'm in. Me too, Nora said. Reuben sighed. Somebody has to keep you all from bleeding out. Count me in, Jeremiah nodded. I'll be the decoy. I owe you all that much. They spent the afternoon preparing. Zeke remained sitting, conserving his strength. His shoulder throbbed, but he locked the pain away in a mental compartment, just like he had during the war. As evening approached, the group gathered their equipment. Miles distributed what ammunition was left, and Nora checked her signal flares. Zeke stood slowly, testing his balance. His legs were weak, but they held. Everyone ready? Miles asked. They left the shelter in single file, moving through the swamp like shadows. Zeke felt his family walking beside him. Sarah's presence, Samuel's energy, Mama Ruth's strength. They weren't ghosts. They were fuel. The group traveled for hours. The lodge finally appeared in a clearing ahead, looking like a predator's den. Yellow lantern light spilled from tall windows, casting long shadows across the manicured grass. Zeke lay flat in the undergrowth, his shoulder pulsing. This was it. Pain was just information now, nothing more. Beside him, Miles studied the perimeter through stolen binoculars. 6 guards were visible, and probably more waited inside. 3 vehicles were parked out front. Communication wire runs to that post over there, Miles noted. Nora crouched nearby, her radio equipment packed away for total silence. I count 8 men through the windows. Boone is in the center. Looks like they are arguing already. Reuben pressed fresh gauze against Zeke's shoulder. You are bleeding through the bandage again. Zeke whispered back, it will hold. They had arrived just before midnight, circling the lodge twice to map every entrance and guard position. The building was larger than they had expected. A hunting retreat that likely belonged to one of the conspirators. It was expensive, isolated, and perfect for planning atrocities without witnesses. Jeremiah checked his watch. 5 minutes, then I move. Zeke grabbed his arm gently. You don't have to do this. We can find another way. No other way gets them all looking in the wrong direction. Jeremiah managed a weak smile. Besides, I have debts to pay, to your family, to everyone they have hurt. Stay alive, Zeke said simply. That is how you pay it. Jeremiah nodded, then slipped away into the darkness. He moved with surprising stealth, for someone who had never received military training. Fear made people capable of remarkable things. Minutes crawled past. Zeke watched the guards, memorizing their patterns. One smoked near the vehicles. Another walked the perimeter with a shotgun. Two stood at the front entrance, talking quietly. Then Jeremiah's shape appeared at the edge of the clearing, illuminated by deliberate moonlight. He stumbled forward, making noise and making himself visible. "Hey, someone help!" he cried out. The guards reacted instantly. Shouts erupted. Three of them rushed toward Jeremiah with weapons raised. The smoker dropped his cigarette and ran to join them. Jeremiah turned and sprinted into the woods, leading them away from the lodge. His voice carried back through the trees, panicked and loud, drawing them deeper into pursuit. "Now," Miles whispered. The circle moved as one unit. Zeke and Miles approached the parked vehicles while Nora circled toward the communication post. Reuben stayed in reserve, watching for additional threats. Zeke reached the first truck, a heavy Ford with mud-caked tires. He pulled a knife from his belt and punctured 2 tires with quick, silent stabs. Air hissed out slowly. Miles disabled the second vehicle by pulling distributor caps from the engine and pocketing them. Nora found the communication wire exactly where Miles had spotted it. She produced wire cutters and severed it cleanly, then scattered the ends to make reconnection difficult. Zeke stepped inside. Silence fell like a blade. He stood in the doorway, mud-covered, blood seeping through his shoulder bandage, his eyes burning with controlled fury. The black Mamba had returned from the dead. "Zeke Turner," Boone whispered. "You are supposed to be dead." "Like my family." Zeke's voice was quiet and deadly. "Like all the others you have murdered." "I don't know what you are talking about." "Yes, you do." Zeke pulled folded papers from inside his jacket. They were copies Jeremiah had painstakingly recreated from memory after the originals were stolen. Financial records, orders, and names, including yours. He dropped them on the floor. "Jeremiah Cole memorized everything before they burned your headquarters. Every detail, every transaction, every family you targeted." Boone's face drained of color. He looked at his assembled conspirators. "He is bluffing. It is not real." But the others were backing away, doubting and afraid. One spoke carefully. "If he is lying, why are we surrounded? Why are the guards gone?" "They are not gone. They are—" A whistle echoed from outside, then another, then a third, coming from impossible directions. Boone spun, searching the shadows. "How many of them are there?" "Enough," Zeke said simply. In truth, there were only 4. But fear and guilt multiplied that number infinitely in the minds of the conspirators. Another man bolted for the back exit. Miles was there, blocking the path with calm authority. The man reversed course, ran into furniture, and fell. Nora's voice crackled from somewhere unseen. She had positioned a speaker near a window, her voice distorted through static. "Federal authorities have been notified. Recording evidence. All participants identified." It was a bluff, but they didn't know that. Boone's composure shattered completely. "This is your fault," he pointed at the man nearest him. "You said this location was secure." "My fault? You are the one who ordered the Turner family killed. You brought this down on us." "I gave no such order." "You did. We all heard you." The room erupted. Men were shouting, blaming, and accusing. Zeke watched them devour each other. The network was collapsing from within exactly as he had planned. Reuben appeared at the doorway, signaling that it was time to go. Zeke backed toward the exit slowly, keeping the conspirators in view. None of them even noticed his departure. They were too consumed by their own mutual destruction. Outside, Nora had already gathered the recording equipment. Miles had secured the documents and disabled the last vehicle. The 2 men who had tried to flee earlier were still arguing on the ground, bound together by rope. Jeremiah emerged from the woods, breathing hard with scratches across his face. The guards he had led away were still lost in the forest, chasing shadows. "Everyone accounted for?" Zeke asked quietly. Nods all around. They moved as one into the tree line. Behind them, the lodge continued its implosion. Glass shattered as someone threw an object. Voices rose in accusation and rage. The circle traveled steadily northeast, following pre-marked trees toward the train line. Dawn was still hours away, but they had time now. The conspiracy had torn itself apart. Zeke walked at the rear again. His shoulder was screaming, and his body was exhausted, but his mind was clear. Sarah, Samuel, Mama Ruth. He had kept his promise. Not through simple revenge, but through the complete dismantling of the machine that had killed them. The forest swallowed them whole, and they moved like ghosts toward the next chapter. The forest thinned as the sun climbed above the horizon, painting the eastern sky in amber and pale gold. Zeke walked ahead, setting the pace despite his wound. Behind him, Miles and Nora followed in silence, while Reuben brought up the rear. The rail junction emerged from the morning mist. A weathered platform stood beside rusted tracks that stretched in both directions. Sergeant Hayes stood beside an old maintenance shed, his eyes scanning the tree line. He was a compact man with graying temples and hands that looked like they had seen hard work. When he spotted the circle, he simply nodded. Zeke approached first. "Sergeant Turner," Hayes's voice was gravelly, "you look like hell." "Feel worse." Hayes glanced at the others. "Is this everyone?" "Everyone who made it," Miles said quietly. Hayes absorbed that news with the stillness of someone who had heard it too many times before. "I'm sorry." Nora stepped forward, carrying the bag that held their evidence, recordings on wire spools, written testimony, photographs, and confessions captured during the chaos at the lodge. "Everything is here," she said. "Names, dates, and transactions. Enough to bring down the whole network." Hayes took the bag and examined the contents. "You did good work. Dangerous work." "Necessary work," Zeke corrected. Hayes met his gaze, veteran to veteran. An understanding passed between them that didn't require words. "I will get this to Washington," Hayes said. "To federal investigators I trust. Men who won't sell it back to the people it exposes. You have my word." "Your word is enough," Zeke said. Hayes checked his pocket watch. "Train comes through in 20 minutes. I will be on it. 3 days to Washington." He looked at each of them. "What will you do?" "Go home," Miles said. "Make sure people understand what happened here," Nora added. Reuben said nothing, but his expression agreed. Hayes turned last to Zeke. "And you?" Zeke didn't answer immediately. He gazed down the tracks. "Finally finish what we started." Hayes nodded slowly. "Good man." He extended his hand and Zeke shook it firmly despite the pain in his shoulder. "Travel safe." "Always do." The circle waited until the distant whistle of an approaching train echoed across the morning. Hayes boarded efficiently, holding the evidence bag close. The train pulled away, carrying hope toward a distant authority. They stood watching until it vanished completely. "Now what?" Nora asked. "Now we go back," Zeke said. By noon, Pine Hollow's main street shimmered under intense heat. The three of them walked openly through town. No more hiding or skulking through back paths. People watched from windows and doorways, some with suspicion, others with respect. Sheriff Redden waited outside his office, leaning against the brick wall. When he saw them, he didn't reach for his weapon. "Turner," he said, "heard you had an interesting night." "Could say that." Redden's expression was complicated. "State police came through about an hour ago and arrested Judge Boone and 6 others, found them at that lodge, half dead from fighting each other. They're saying it was an internal conspiracy, people turning on their own." "Sometimes that's exactly what it is," Zeke said carefully. Redden studied him. "You know anything about that?" "I know justice comes in different forms." The sheriff absorbed this, turning his hat in his hands. "Federal investigators are arriving tomorrow. They want statements from everyone. They're treating this as a criminal conspiracy across state lines." "Good." "I'm resigning," Redden said abruptly. "End of the week. Then I'm testifying at the hearings. Full cooperation. Figure it's the least I can do. I should have done more years ago." "You did what you could when it mattered most," Zeke said. That counts. Redden extended his hand, and Zeke shook it. One more thing, Redden added. The ironwood tree. Federal authorities have marked it as evidence. Nobody is allowed near it until the investigation ends. After that, it becomes something else, Zeke finished. Something better. Hope you're right. They parted ways at the corner. Zeke led the circle toward the eastern edge of town. The afternoon sun blazed as they walked dirt paths between modest homes. Children played in yards again, and families sat on porches, talking openly instead of whispering. The Harrison family had returned. Their home was being repaired. New boards replaced the burned ones. Mr. Harrison waved from the porch. "Thank you," Harrison called out. The words carried weight. Zeke nodded and kept walking. They passed Mrs. Eller's house. She sat in her rocking chair watching the road. When she saw Zeke, tears flowed down her face. She didn't speak, but she raised one hand in a silent salute. He returned it. Finally, they reached the path leading to Zeke's property. The burned cabin remained untouched, but the land showed signs of care. Someone had cleared the debris. Someone had planted flowers near the 3 graves. The ironwood tree rose ahead, massive and ancient. Yellow rope now cordoned it off with federal markers, but the rope that had once hung from its branches was gone, removed as evidence. Zeke stopped just outside the barrier. Miles and Reuben stayed back to give him space. He stood there for a long time, studying the tree that had witnessed such horror. But he noticed something else now. New growth was sprouting from the base, green shoots reaching toward the sunlight, life persisting despite everything. "It will mean something different soon," he said quietly to no one in particular. "I hope you found that story powerful. Feel free to let me know if you would like me to help you brainstorm a new story or explore another chapter in Zeke's life."